Hello! I was gonna make another video, but then I had a thought, like a really random thought, which I thought would be fun to share, so I decided to share my thoughts with you guys, and that's a lot of thoughts. So, here's the idea. You remember this one part from the Genshin pre-game comic where Venti just starts listing off different gods that gave up their bodies to become the land in other worlds? It's weird, yeah, like really weird and random, but I kind of just shrugged it off because it's just Venti being Venti, and Venti likes to do really weird things sometimes, so I just ignored him. But then came the thought. What if Venti was actually talking about the residents of Teyvat before the arrival of humans? In other words, what if he was talking about 3 of the 7 bishop sovereigns? If so, then what about the other 4? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today, folks. That's the theory. The theory is, what if the dragons make up Teyvat? Like their bodies, like we're actually living on their bodies, like in Xenoblade, how you can play on the Bionis and the Mechonis, and you're like on the bodies of giant. Anyway, before I go any further with some context, followed by the actual theory part of this theory video, there are a few things you should know. This theory is just for fun and will likely never get confirmed or refuted in-game, or if it does, it'll be like years down the road, so don't take it too seriously, just have fun with it. As usual, all post-video notes and corrections can be found in the pinned comment, while video citation sources and links for further reading will be in the description box below, so please make sure to check those out. Okay, no more disclaimers, let's get into that sweet context. Right, so, if you didn't know, there's this one book you can get from a quest in Enkanomiya that has the world creation myth thing for Teyvat. It's a very important book. Got Urabashi killed. May the lore Archon rest in peace. In this book, it is said that in ancient times, the whole world belonged to the bishops, who were in turn ruled over by 7 sovereigns, who were, like big elemental dragon kings. So anyway, the magic dino dragons were chilling in their magic dino kingdom when this thing called the Primordial One showed up and decided it wanted the planet for humans. So the Primordial One made 4 shades of itself and went to war with the bishops, wiping out most of them and forcing the rest into hiding. That obviously includes the 7 sovereigns, who I assume, by the way everything's written, are all dead. Once it wiped out the dinos, the Primordial One terraformed the Earth in order to prep it for the humans, which would get made a little bit later. Part of that terraforming process involved merging the Light Realm into this new human realm. We know from some other Enkanomiya books that the bishops thrived on the energy from the Light Realm, or that they lived there and the Light Realm has gotten converted into the human realm, or you know what, just skip this part, we don't know crap. But what we do know is that raw light energy from the light realm is kinda toxic to humans, so the energy gets converted from something pretty toxic to something much milder and then sent through the ley line network. This light energy then kinda gets split into several different forms, which we know now in Teyvat as elemental energy. That means that light energy is basically all of the elemental energy that we know of, but like all smooshed into one type of thing, alright? This is important for later. Now the 7 sovereigns each embodied one of these types of energy, although it wasn't really called by its Greekified names. For example, instead of a hydro sovereign, there was a water sovereign. Instead of a geo sovereign, there was an earth sovereign, etc., and so forth. So then I got to thinking, what actually happened to what was left of the sovereigns after they died? I mean, we do still see the skeletons of Urabashi and Durin hanging around, and yeah, it's only been like 500 to 2,000 years for those skeletons to just be sitting there, but you'd think there would be at least something left of the most powerful ancient dragons ever, right? Which brings me back to Venti. In the pre-game comic, Venti mentions the names of 3 gods, Purusha, Pangu, and Ymir. He says that in a different world, each one gave up their bodies to form the land. So I got to thinking, what if the remains of the sovereigns were used by the Primordial One during the terraforming of the planet? Like say it's a water planet and they just take the bodies of these dragons and they form land out of them. What if the reason why each region has kind of an elemental theme isn't because of the ruling Archon, but because that stretch of land was formed from the remains of a corresponding elemental dragon sovereign that are all stitched together with this invisible energy web network thing? Really weird sewing project, but I don't judge what gods do for hobbies. But you know, like an earth dragon formed the land for Liyue, and a thunder dragon formed the islands of Inazuma, and so on and so on. And does this idea even have any merit, or am I just spitballing? Well, as it turns out, it's kind of both. So Purusha, Pangu, and Ymir are actually real names of gods from different cultures in different parts of the world who did, in fact, give up their bodies to form the land of that respective culture. We'll go over these 3 first, and then we'll move on to some predictions about the remaining 4. Pangu is probably the most straightforward reference to place because he was a primordial Chinese deity born from a cosmic egg. When he died, his different body parts became the land, rivers, animals, minerals, etc. The Chinese influences here that are very, very obvious and indisputable quite obviously correlate to Liyue, so according to the initial theory, Pangu should be the name of the earth dragon that was used to create Liyue. Ymir is fairly easy to place as well. Being a Nordic god whose body became the land and sea, he's likely being used to reference Mondstadt due to their similar Germanic influences. As if the names like Dvalin didn't give it away. Because, you know, Dvalin is a name of a deer in Norse mythology, and also the name of a dwarf, I think, which I think is kind of weird that it's like two. Anyway, that would make Ymir the air dragon from which Mondstadt was formed. Purusha, though, is a little bit weird, because depending on which branch of Hinduism you look at or participate in, it can be either a deity responsible for the creation of all life, or just the source material from which the world is made. For the purposes of this theory, I'm just gonna kind of smoosh both contexts together, which I know is not really all that correct to do, so please forgive me, but like, if Purusha is being considered like the material from which the world is made, then obviously its quote-unquote body would have become the land, so that checks out. And of course, the Hindu roots place Purusha squarely in Sumeru, and therefore it would make it the plant dragon. If you're wondering why we're putting Hinduism in Sumeru, well, it has to do with the Teyvat Travail story trailer, and in there it clearly labels the Sumeru chapter as involving the Puranas, and the Puranas are, well, a Hindu thing. So yeah, that's that. Purusha, plant dragon. Now I'm all out of names, which means it's time to start guessing at names. And basically, I am now looking at different cultures from different parts of the world that we haven't already, used or placed. And we're gonna find a creator god whose body was used to make the land, and see if we can make it fit. We'll start with Inazuma, because we kind of went like Mondstadt, Liyue, and then to Sumeru, and we just kind of skipped Inazuma, so I feel like we should talk about that first. Now, as far as I can tell in Japanese mythology, there's no real clear-cut this god died and their body became the land candidate on the same level of the established 3. But the 2 gods that stood out to me the most were Izanami and Izanagi. Izanami and Izanagi were both tasked to create the land within the sea because the whole world was a water planet, and this would then form the islands of Japan. Izanami was actually the one who gave birth to the islands, so that would make her the technical creator deity. But of course, she then died after land birth? It's not childbirth. Is the land considered a child? Can you do that? God rules are weird. Anyway, after she died, she was sent to the realm of the dead. Izanagi followed after her, but only found her corpse there. But then, her, dead body birthed Raijin. Now, Raijin is the inspiration for Raiden. Obviously, the archons of the Inazuma region are the Raiden twins. So that's why I think Izanami is the perfect name for the thunder dragon, sovereign, that would have then made the islands of Inazuma, because, Izanami is not only giving birth to the islands, but also from her body came the gods that would then become the archons. It makes sense, okay? Thunder dragon, Izanami. Moving on to Fontaine, which is gonna be a little bit hard. In fact, it might be one of the hardest to place, I think, because Fontaine should technically be based on France, or that area. But France doesn't really have a clearly defined ancient culture as far as I'm aware. The best I can guess at is like Celtic ancestry, so we're gonna go Celtic, I guess. The myth I found with the most significance within that kind of scope of mythological influences goes something like this. From the void came 2 gods, Dawn and Danu. Together they bore several children. one of which apparently had a grudge against his dad, Dawn, and that child decided to cut him into little tiny pieces. His mother, Danu, was so upset that her tears flooded the earth and washed away the remains of Dawn until they became the sky, the sea, and the land. So I have very little else to work with when it comes to Fontaine and Celtic creation myths, especially ones where a god's body actually becomes the land, so Dawn seems like he might be my only option, so let's just call the remains of the water dragon Dawn. I mean, I did say this was going to be a lot of guesswork. But believe it or not, Natlan is a little bit easier than the previous ones, even though we know nothing about the region itself. Well, what we do know is that Natlan has Mayan, Incan, or Aztec inspiration, or a mix of all three. We'll just have to wait and see. I'm not really sure where they're going with this, but for the purposes of this theory, I've settled on Aztec because there happens to be a fairly good candidate here. Now, as far as I know, the Aztecs actually have multiple creation myths that are all a little bit different, and they all kind of exist in the same continuity because they believe that the world kind of existed in a regenerative sort of cycle, right? And so the last cycle was known as the fifth and final cycle, and that's the one we're going to talk about. So in the fifth cycle, there was a sea monster known as Tlaltecutli, one of the survivors after the fourth great flood. From what I can tell, she was just kind of chilling one day, and Quetzalcoatl, the flying snake god, and Tezcatlipoca, a jaguar god, looked at her and said, "Hey, that lady's gotta go." So they fought her, and won, and then they tore her in two, actually, and her top half became the sky while her lower half became the earth. And the other gods were so upset about this unfair death and her unfair treatment that they decided that her various body parts should then become features of the earth, so her skin became the grass, her hair became the trees, etc., etc. What a way to go. And I know that she's technically like a water dragon crocodile monster type thing, or like, a monster that lived in the water, but fire and water together were considered symbols of war in Aztec culture, and the Pyro Archon is the god of war, so fire dragon, done. It's Tlaltecutli. That's definitely the Pyro dragon sovereign of Natlan. And that brings us to our final dragon candidate in Snezhnaya. And this was the most difficult one to place. See, if we assume that this region is based off of Russia, which it does seem to be, then it should have Slavic roots as far as mythology goes. But the problem with Slavic mythology is that all of their creation myths have been completely lost in their original forms. All that's left is like a Christianized version, and those don't really reflect ancient Slavic beliefs, which were also really diverse, by the way. So we're basically working with crumbs. And that also means I don't have like a real myth to kind of latch onto at all. So that's a thing. The best I can do here is really just take a guess, and I will guess that the most probable candidate for this sovereign would be Svarog. Now, while Svarog was considered a blacksmithing god, he was also recognized as the god that ruled the realm of the gods, and he does have an incredibly simplistic creation myth associated with him. Well, I mean, that is if you can even call it that. I'm mostly just extrapolating from, like little tiny crumbs of anecdotes that are written about him, but it's not like an actual linear myth like I've been able to get for these other cultures, there's nothing. If you know of any good sources on like realistic Slavic mythology, can you let me know? Because there's nothing out there that's complete, nothing, at least not in English, and I can't read Russian. Anywho, best I can tell is that because Svarog was a blacksmith god, he was considered the one responsible for forging the sun. The sparks created during the forging process of the sun eventually became life. And that's it. That's that's all I got. That's everything. I know that's a pretty weak argument to say, hey, this should be the sovereign that we created the land from, right? But one other thing that's interesting about Svarog and why he's actually my pick here, even though there's two other pretty good candidates, is the fact that he's supposedly a sleeping god, and when he wakes up, he's supposed to bring about the end of the world with him. Now, while there's zero evidence for his body becoming the land, the idea of a sleeping remains of an ancient dragon god making up the land of Snezhnaya is a really cool and also pretty on-theme idea. I mean, we're talking about an ancient dragon that got wiped out by an alien invader, so of course they're gonna be pretty upset when they wake up, right? Going on a rampage seems pretty reasonable in that case, so I'm just gonna roll with that. Yeah, there, done. Svarog, ancient ice dragon whose body makes up Snezhnaya. And there you have it. 7 names for 7 sovereigns. I have nothing clever to leave you with, but maybe we can have some fun speculating in the comments section, huh? About the theory that will probably never get proven or disproven? Let's just explore some possibilities while we wait for the next patch. Well, I hope you guys had fun. I'm off to hunt for magic dino bones because that's a thing I do. So I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.